Some leaders leave footprints, others leave libraries. You're tuning into the Authors on Mission podcast, where industry giants become literacy legends. In every episode, we talk with authors who turn their brilliance into books that transform lives. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, your host and Chief Creative Officer at Authors on Mission. Welcome to your authorship experience. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Authors on Mission, where we explore the strategies and insights of experts who've mastered their craft while inspiring the next generation of authors. I'm your host, Danielle Hutchinson, Chief Creative Officer at Authors on Mission, and today we're joined by Scott Raven, a performance poet turned stay-at-home dad, whose new book, Stay-at-Home Dad, reimagines parenting through the lens of playground equipment and wordplay. Scott has performed everywhere from prisons to playgrounds as part of the Mayhem Poets, and now he's taking his most challenging role yet, which is fatherhood. And today we're going to explore how he balances creativity with parenting and how he's turned daily moments with his son into powerful poetry that speaks to parents and non-parents alike. So, as always in Authors on Mission, we're not just discussing the successful authors, but diving deep into the strategies that can help you become an expert in your own right. So, without further ado, welcome Scott to the Authors on Mission podcast.
Thank you, Danielle. Good to be here on the AOM in the AM. We're here in a little morning record, and yeah, good to be here to talk about writing books, all that good stuff.
I love it, and I love your play at words there. It's always good to know, you're not only a poet when you're typing it on the computer, but right as you're speaking directly to me. That's really fun. So I always like to start off our podcast by, asking for a little bit of an overview of who you are, what led you into the writing world, and just so our audience knows a little bit about your background. So why don't you give that a shot?
Yeah, I always like to say my name is Scott, but my rap name or my stage name is also Scott, but Scott with 3 T's. So you often see I write under the pen name Scott with 3 T's. Kind of just, a fun little way that, all right, even, these extravagant names that people have, I'm Scott through and through to students and people alike. So I am a poet from a athlete, I guess you would say. Started off kind of playing sports, was a high jumper and a basketball player. And basically after an injury to my left knee, I, started to gravitate a little bit more towards the arts. I've been, kind of performing poetry since 5th grade, but it wasn't until I kind of got to college. I met some, like-minded individuals where we started an open mic called Verbal Mayhem. And Verbal Mayhem, the longest running open mic in New Jersey, whoop whoop, is now became kind of Mayhem Poets. That open mic runs, and I kind of a trio of poets, and we tour around performing, as you said, prisons to playgrounds. Grew up in Jersey. Family of teachers. Both my parents were teachers. My dad was a phys ed teacher. My mom a ESL or ELL teacher. And that kind of has shaped my whole existence from that point on. My dad being kind of my sports influence, my mom kind of my English and literary spark. And I kind of, bring both of them on stage and everywhere I go. Now I'm kind of becoming a, as you mentioned, a stay-at-home dad. I'm, kind of writing about my experiences as a new father. I know that was, a little bit all over the place, but yeah, happy to talk about this journey.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing that with us. It's always good to have a good background information about our authors here so we know where their writing's coming from and it's inspiring them. And it's great that you have such a diverse background too, from athlete to performer. What inspired that change, by the way, from going from sports to theater, kind of two separate ends, you'd say?
Sure. So early on, I mentioned I had an injury. I just got brought up to the varsity soccer team. This was a week before my mom had been diagnosed with cancer. And after that, I didn't know whether I was going to stay kind of with the team or what kind of going to do. A week into playing on soccer, I broke my wrist. And that injury I kind of took as a sign as, all right, every day after school, I would be with my mom. I would spend with my mom and I would kind of share my poetry with her. I would kind of perform for her, these Weird Al renditions. And I had a couple moments of that in my life where, all right, when things quieted down, when I was unable to physically do something, what could I do, mentally, and what could I kind of do emotionally? Sports for me taught me a great deal, teamwork, discipline. kind of a lot of things that I take with me into performance, but it didn't particularly have the same type of sensitivity that I find within the arts. In high school, I got my soccer team to audition for the Shakespeare play. It was Much Ado About Nothing. And we ended up kind of, performing that where I was able to play soccer and do the arts. So I kind of have oscillated always, kind of through both of those, kind of sports and the arts. And, I realized my body not always going to be there for me. What can I do to sharpen my mind? What can I do to do that? And, that's kind of mirrored even more so now where my dad, he at this point confined to a wheelchair. He physically can't do a lot of the things that he taught me to be able to do. And I still kind of like to do a lot of those physical things with which to, kind of echo my dad's influence, but also, as a way of kind of bringing that onto a stage and in performance.
I mean, it's good to know that you have sort of a balance between both of those, and it resonates deeply with, what you're writing and all of your poems as well. I can tell, you're inspired by those different points in your life as well. And along with your other, sources of influence, you actually mentioned to me you have a couple, different poets and authors that you were also inspired with. You mentioned being influenced by both Dr. Seuss and Shel Silverstein. So how did all these influences, you think, shaped your current work?
Sure. Yeah, Silverstein and Seuss, the way that they could straddle kind of an adult and a child audience almost. Work that, something that kids can get out of as well as adults. The Simpsons, has done that for years very well, where it's embedded with all these references that may or not have gotten. So I always strive when writing, on one level, to be able to follow it maybe on an emotional level, but on another, these references that can come from any period of time, from one's childhood or from even kind of the future. And basically, yeah, being able to kind of, all right, present, with wordplay, double meanings and that sort of thing in poetry and work. Another poet that got me into things, Weird Al Yankovic, who, the king of the parody. So parody, as well, kind of taking an existing work and being able to kind of put your own little spin on it. I did that a lot with sonnets early on, where, Shakespeare wrote, 150 plus sonnets. To be able to kind of take that and how can you bring that into a bit of a modern audience as well. The playfulness of all these authors still stays with me. You have some people that play with video games, some people play with toys. Me, I play with words. That's my thing as much as I possibly can.
Yeah, and one thing that you did mention before this podcast as well is that, how you like to take your written pieces, bring it into the present moment and, perform it with that sense of play. It definitely seems to be something that is a core belief in your mind as you begin writing and going about everyday life is, that sense of play as you age. And, clearly, Stay Up Poem Dad is a book that really just embodies all of that.
Right.
So,
Yeah, I'm using various pieces of playground equipment as kind of a metaphor of what's kind of happening. And yeah, I'm at the playground with my young son and, I'm playing along with him, and I hope, he'll see that and say, oh, I'm enjoying this and dad's enjoying this too, and that might, carry over into adulthood. I like to think of like, not to be childish, but childlike, in your approach to life, finding kind of, all right, where can you find these times to, have a spontaneous dance break or, slide down onto something. But with playgrounds in general, I realize, there is the ups and downs of it. People tend to think playgrounds as places of just joy. And, I was taken by the idea of a seesaw, that there is the top and the bottom of that seesaw. There is the highs and lows. A slide, there's the top of the slide and, kind of the bottom of that slide. And there were, I guess, 3 events, a few in my life that really put that into perspective for me, where I was out on a swing with my son and I got a call that my dad had been hospitalized. And that immediate switch of you're at a pinnacle of joy watching your son and then life intervenes and there's some, real stuff happening. And kind of going back and forth, there was another day where I'm on a playground with my son and we're having a wonderful day and my family and I visited, the Holocaust Museum in Miami. And a poem, in my view, can have both the silly and the serious. You can feel both of those. In the span of a conversation, you can go through a lot of different emotions in the course of the day, in the course of a singular work. Films do that very well, I believe. So, there was those two, and the last one, which really kind of, shocked, the family, was with my wife, my wife is actually a psychiatrist, and it's an interesting mix of us kind of being, poet and a psychiatrist, kind of dealing with emotions. And, I kind of outwardly share mine. She kind of takes in that of others. We got a call that my wife's brother took his own life. And so this really kind of really put a spin on everything, where he'd take his own life. And, my wife falls into quite a depression. And at the same time, we want to be there, for our son. And the nuances of an event like this, you're not really able to explain to a very young child. And I started to think a lot about the movie, Life is Beautiful, if you've ever heard. Life is Beautiful, about, I don't know if have you seen that movie? Roberto Benigni, an Italian waiter, and his family, they are sent to a concentration camp. And the dad is separated from his wife, and he's with his son, and he has to shield his son from kind of the horrors of this event. And how does he do that? Us as the audience, we are there. We are aware of what's happening around there, but what can we do to kind of shield, the son until he has both the intellectual and maybe the emotional capacity? Children, I know, can feel before they can think. And I'm sure he can sense that amongst us, kind of the sorrows and the heights, but there is something that will take time to be able to explain. So that's a whole roundabout thing to say in the book. I've kind of put like a choose your own adventure game in that book, that, all right, there are these poems that have this difficult subject matter. Can the child navigate through that and still, learn through some pits and, follow strands of, different colors, different houses, a different journey for him, making a little bit of a game out of it. And at the bottom of the book, kind of there's a seesaw to reflect kind of the ups and downs that we all have. I've encouraged people, once they, receive the book, to write your own emotion on the top of that seesaw. When you're reading something, you feel a certain way, and what do you do with that emotion? Hopefully, maybe you write something about it, or it spurs you into action to do something. For me, writing has been that sublimation for all this stuff that's happening in my life and in the world as well.
Thanks for sharing all that with us, because, I think it's one thing that's very powerful and strong in your book is that you explore grief and joy coexistently, right? And again, I'm very sorry to hear about these, stories within your family, and it must be really hard to recount them to anybody on the podcast or even when you're writing. So, it's an amount of strength that goes into that in itself. But it also requires a great amount of skill to balance these sort of joyful topics while also talking about more serious topics and kind of putting it all together. And I guess that's what, you mentioned the seesaw a couple of times. It's actually one of the ones I wrote down here in my notes as being one of my favorites, because, whether you're up or down, you're still on the seesaw, right? So it's kind of like in itself a balance and a metaphor there. So yeah, if you don't mind, I'd love to even talk about that one in particular. And to all of our audience members right now, if you're, interested in learning more about it, you can pick up the book and flip it yourself right over to page 98, I believe it is, where we go into it. And you kind of have like a 4th of July vibe going on there, which is interesting because even in that itself is like joy and grief at the same time. And it's just very well written, I believe. It kind of embodies like all these different themes at once. So
Thank you. That one in particular kind of joys and sorrows, where you think of, Independence Day, where we're celebrating, independent from Britain, and, what our fellow, those in London and UK, they're not celebrating that. There was war, and that compared to, Cinco de Mayo, as well as what's been happening, of course, in Israel. Now, I'm in an interesting position with that, as my wife is actually Israeli. And has, connection to those in Israel. So that in itself, is a seesaw to be part of a community that feels one way about certain thing, and then to be in a household with a woman who I would say has family and has her closest loved ones, in an environment that can be, that's dangerous, that there's terrorism happening. So and it did all these different seesaws that are going on, and the one in particular was at a Fourth of July celebration where, you know, people are celebrating, and I see, my wife, like she's obviously, she's there but not there, where there's something else that's completely going on in her mind at the time, and then seconds later, a news crew comes over to us and interviews my wife about bringing kids to a July celebration, and the joy that the kids are getting out of this, like how it switched from, kind of three tones in just like the span of seconds. And I guess, yeah, I mean, that is life. That is life often. I don't know about you. I try to be, like I say, that in the center of that seesaw. You want to be able to feel, you're feeling each of those. And I try to kind of, spur hopeful and optimistic in all situations as much as I can, which doesn't mean it still doesn't take a toll when you have, these heavy topics. But for me, there is a sense of when I get to perform a poem or write a poem, there is that release that hopefully, I'm getting, and all, as well as a listener or an audience as well.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for diving into that a lot. Like I said, I really do love this one because it's just really cool, the idea of being on that seesaw, finding that right balance, but also just the way you kind of flip from one to the other, just within the poem itself, between the holidays and all of that you mentioned. And, especially that last line, like winning isn't everything when the loser wins twice, right? Kind of just like a good metaphor right there in itself. So I see that, and you always have to maintain that sort of like hope and normalcy, even in difficult times too, for the children's sake. As somebody who's worked as a teacher, I know what that's like when even, if your brain isn't in the moment and feeling it, you still have to put on a happy face and kind of like maintain that, just like the movie you mentioned too, trying to shield them from whatever it might be going on. So,
Right. And they're going to pick up on that. Like the kids still, they can pick up on when it's true, when it's truthful or not, like there is the idea of putting on the happy face, but there has to be a sense of, all right, yeah, you're enjoying, what you're doing. And, I can sense maybe a kid, they seeing sadness behind it, but I try to smile, at my son at every second that I possibly can.
100%. And another thing that you mentioned before, and that I also wanted to bring up too, is sort of like you designed this book in a way that the reader could choose their own adventure while going through it. I wonder if maybe you could speak a little bit more on that for our audience today, because that's definitely an interesting interactive element that you have in your book here, and something that perhaps a lot of our listeners might even want to embody in their own writing one day, because I think it's really cool, allowing the reader to experience for themselves.
Right. So in addition to kind of being, you can jump from a written version of the poem to kind of a either recorded or video version of the poem. You can also do that tonally. You can, read a silly poem. You can read a serious poem as you kind of flip through the book. In the book, there's a series of QR codes that will link to videos of me performing either at home with my young son or actually a live reading at like a poetry event. Now, some of these aren't yet done, but will be in the book. Now they're permanently in there as I continue the book tour. So by getting the book, you have access to kind of a living document that there will be new things that are added to it as I perform them at various places with the book. So the links will remain the same, and you'll be able to kind of pop in. It's all kind of password protected. If you get the book, you get the password to, how to access these videos. And I wanted that to mimic not only that movie kind of, a little bit of Life is Beautiful, but also, give your own sense of adventure. With Mayhem Poets, I was able to kind of travel the world, like you said, to almost all 50 states, lots of different countries. And life is an adventure. How can you live it poetically as well?
Yeah, and I think it's a great method to have that sort of process for your readers. The QR codes, for example, it links, just not just the text, but to your other multimedia performances. So it's a great way to promote not only like your speaking engagements where you're retelling your poems, but also promoting the book at the same time. So, for example, if somebody were to see you perform live or reading out loud, they'd be interested in reading the book, and then vice versa. They want to go see you after reading the book as well. So it kind of like, you're probably not thinking it promotionally exactly, but to anybody listening right now who is trying to promote their own like speaking services, workshops, that sort of thing, it's a great method to do, like to add in those QR codes. And one of my past clients actually just recently did the same thing. He has a YouTube channel. He was looking to get a little bit more engagement. We wrote a book, and within the book, there are the QR codes leading you right to that channel. And then it's kind of like a win-win for both platforms. So I think it's just an expert way to set it up. It's pretty cool. Very creative.
Right. And it's also like when you're reading a book, I always ask how much time do you ever, if there's a word or something that you don't understand, will you break from the book to look that up? Will you go somewhere else, or do you want to stay in it? It's always kind of a balance, like you want them to go through a whole thing and then maybe have something additional, but how much interaction with a particular piece does an average reader actually have? How do you keep that attention? That's another way to, maintain, to keep, I guess, or divert their attention, to appeal to their attention. But what other ways, can you kind of hold that attention? I mean, some of my poems have a lot of things kind of even embedded in them, and you want it to work on one level, like like the sonnet. But if you dig deeper, or maybe you'll find there's like a hidden message, within it, or something like that. So I don't know. Do you ever, when you're reading something, go off of the page to a separate source, or do you prefer to stay in the book itself? I would wonder.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it would kind of depend on the context. And also, for example, if it was something like this and I knew I was going to be going to a video that was like reading it out loud, I'd be very inclined to pop over something. But you're right. If I'm just like finding a word, I'm like, I don't know what that word is. I guess my natural instinct, and maybe for all of us, would be just, I'm going to skip along and just decide what that word means by context or something, right? Rather than looking up at in a dictionary or something. So I see the value from what you do, because then, if that person still can understand that word but in another sense by hearing you say it out loud, and like the tone in your voice may help clarify that, for example. So I guess it all has to do with situation.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and the idea of a performance poem, being put onto the page, or kind of vice versa, those two worlds, page versus stage, have often been, kind of at odds. I've tried to merge those as much as possible, where like there is a way that some of my poems can be looked at as like kind of an acting monologue, and within the writing, do you include stage directions? Do you include, like, all right, he makes this sound here, or, this gesture happens. Like, Shakespeare's plays they have stage directions, it's poetry, but some of the stage directions does end up becoming up for interpretation. But that's, kind of the work that I'm into as well. Kind of, let's take, something that was just performed, and then how do we put it in the page? This stuff was kind of a merge of the two.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely interesting to think about, because you're right. When you're reading a book, especially one of poems like this, like you don't say like, raise your hand up in the air, like, or anything like that, like a gesture.
Right.
You have to just kind of imagine it for yourself. And, the way that I might read the poem without hearing you performing it would be completely different, which is the beauty of a poem in itself. You interpret it the way that your mind naturally wants you to, but there's definitely that benefit of the dual elements there.
Yeah.
I can imagine somebody like pulling up your video and then reading it on the page at the same time as they have it playing on their phone right next to them or something. So.
Right. Yeah, hope for that.
Yeah, and to everyone listening right now, highly recommend it. It's very easy to make a QR code and link it right into your book. Especially in today's day and age, a lot of us enjoy reading, but we're also addicted to our screens. So it's a good way to kind of balance and add some engagement too. So really cool stuff. So, I guess sort of as we're beginning to talk a little bit more about the book, I'm wondering if you could just share a little bit more about perhaps your writing process, any sorts of tips you might have for aspiring authors who, they're inspired and they're just not really quite sure how to get their thoughts and ideas onto a page. I'm wondering, what was your process like? How did you go about making it happen?
All right. So this writing process a little different with a little one at home, of course. So naps were key. Where while baby was being held in kind of right hand, I'm writing with left hand. There were kind of on the playground, I'm writing kind of poems in my mind, that sort of thing. What was really key was, kind of attaching myself to a writing community with which, all right, I could be maybe for 1 hour or 1 or 2 hours out writing. And that was the Miami Poetry Club that I discovered, upon moving here pretty soon, that they do, kind of 2 no-cost workshops for writers of all kinds. One was a generative workshop where it was just, all right, you're there. They kind of have a framework a little bit at a time, writing on that topic. The next one is you maybe bring a poem and people kind of discuss it and chop it up a little bit. So, being part of a community, really key. Me personally, I tend to dream poems. I tend to kind of like before I wake up from the little amount of sleep that I was getting, to right before I wake up, I kind of get like a bit of a refrain and an idea and try to get a couple lines off in the head before maybe getting to a keyboard or a page. I use my phone to write. Some say, all right, why are you looking at your phone all day? But I'm using it to write. I'm there and writing. Something that I heard, one of the guys that I write with a lot too is, you have that urge to kind of like either thread something out, tweet something out when you have kind of an idea half formed or something. I prefer to take all those ideas that you might want to put right out and sit with that and write a longer type of poem. Really take a topic and kind of explore it from all sides. My sides that I like to explore from is, how does this relate to me? How does this relate to another person? And then how does it relate to the world? All poems I kind of put through that lens, like welcome to what you want, what you got, what you need. Like I want this for me, I want this for another person, and then I want this for the world, or what is missing, in all those aspects. So like every poem, I try to go through those three areas. And having fun with language. I don't see not necessarily just words. I see letters. I see letters before words, right? We're breaking down, like the sound of a letter itself, punctuation marks. I look at exclamation points and I see them, as geysers, and reverse exclamation points as waterfalls, or vice versa, where the letters themselves and the shapes of those, everything can be poems. One thing that I've been big on lately is writing with another person as well. Writing often looked on as a kind of solitary craft, but why not, write with someone maybe you do agree with or don't agree with? Kind of what can you write together? Maybe kind of sharing some things, or people that come from different backgrounds to write together to then present a piece. I have a lot of group poems in the show that I perform with Mayhem Poets where we're writing together that, some of it's like Abbott and Costello routines. We have this like Martin Luther Queen poem that's kind of like, all right, quick back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Others are, all right, let's sit down and let's, talk about, female empowerment, and let's talk about, war versus peace and that sort of thing.
Yeah, well, a lot of tips right there. I mean, thank you so much for sharing all those. I think, especially to me, the idea of like balancing the baby in one arm and typing with the other one, like it just shows not only determination, but also that no matter what your lifestyle is like, you could still find time to write. A lot of our listeners might be like entrepreneurs or business people who think they can't find the time in their schedule to write. But I mean, Scott, if you're able to do it while trying to get your kid down for a nap, anybody can do it, and wherever they are, whether at the playground or you're at the gym or you're cooking a meal. I mean, with these days and the technology we have, there's no reason why you can't just pull up your phone and begin typing, like you said. And I also love the idea of working collaboratively with others, because you're right. I mean, the more heads that are joined as you write and offering ideas, the better that the writing can be, with multiple perspectives and insights. So those are some great things to keep in mind and consider. Appreciate that.
Yeah. So yeah, I was thinking a lot about, like kind of the title, stay at home dad, stay at poem dad. And, it's a word play, but, the idea that for a while, my sense of home my home's been on the road, but my sense of home is the poem, right? Like it is poetry, like that, the way with which I navigate and kind of see the world. I'm grateful that I have, a family now and a sense of home, with this family, but it's all poetry. I bring my family into my poems, and my family are my poems. It's all kind of, yeah, intertwined a little bit together. And like, having come from, a home where, I had lost my mother at an early age, and that sort of thing, my sense of home was a little bit out of whack sometimes, and this allows me to find that, and I am a little bit more, kind of, I'd say, grounded now, where you're at home with the family, but I feel like it's just as joyful and fulfilling. I want to be there instead of, gallivanting on the road all the time. I still do perform, and it'll be up to my child whether or not he wants to get into this or doesn't want to get into this. I've been very conscious of that with young people too. Of, all right, do I want to gear my child to sports or the arts? Because you do have influence, and who else has influence on these things? Directors, coaches, parents. But you can nudge in a particular direction, and you see that spark. What direction will you point them in?
Yeah, and that's definitely something to think about, like the legacy aspect of it, right? Again, the influence that you have on your children or anybody reading, for instance. And I mean, branching off of that, I understand that, this new book it's coming out, certain release date.
Yeah, so March 11th, coming up real soon. I'm doing a performance slash book signing at the Books and Books in Coconut Grove in Florida. I don't know if this will be out by then, but from that point on, there'll be a video of that performance as well. That it'll be available in all places and stuff.
Yeah, we're also sure we will have this out before then, so everybody listening right now, be sure to check it out. We've already given you a sneak peek at some of these poems too, so you're gonna have to go and pick it up once it was released, and you can see it for yourself too, especially the live performance you just mentioned. But yeah, I mean, branching off of that though, I also understand that you have more in store coming up as well. You mentioned to me about some writing performance workshops that might be on the horizon. Would you like to share a little bit about that with us?
Sure. Yeah, kind of as an offshoot of this, I want to reach out to other stay-at-home dads and moms, new parents of any kind, where, like you said, how do you carve out that time to find time to write? It'll be 2 a month. One will be, with kids in attendance, one without the kids in attendance. The idea of, all right, is there something that you wouldn't write about, while your kids are there, and something that, you're inspired more to write about while your kids are there? Exploring kind of those two, and that will culminate in an anthology of all these voices of these, the challenges, joys of kind of raising a kid, and that sort of thing. So. That look for those that'll be connected through the website. I'm probably going to have them at this cafe right near my actual house. So,
and with that's also in Florida then, for any Florida-based.
It will be in Florida, but one of those, I think, having a Zoom component will probably best as well.
Yeah, that way anybody can just tune right in. I love it. Just stay tuned on details for that, everybody, and also be aware for the release coming up very soon, and we'll be looking forward to that. So I'm also curious, as we begin to sort of wrap things up a little bit today, any other bits of advice that you might want to offer our listeners to take home with them today? Anything that they can perhaps use as homework after the episode ends and put into their own practices as they're going out their writing journeys? What do you think?
Sure. Yeah, for me, like I tried, like you said, the sports thing, and that kind of acting thing too. Poetry was the world for me, where it was combining these elements of, some athletics, but it was combining improv, stand-up, theater, all together. If you can find a community, be part of that community that will help nurture, what that passion is. If not, maybe start your own. I had started an open mic at Rutgers, inspired by the movie Fight Club. Actually, instead of a fight club, it was a write club. So, verbal Project Mayhem became Verbal Mayhem became Mayhem Poets. And from there, was able to meet people from all these different backgrounds and experiences, sharing stuff. So I would say, yeah, start your own, kind of your own community that's going to allow you to connect with people from these various backgrounds. And don't lose that sense of play in your writing, as well as in life, as you can. And you can take this big lesson, from kids, how quickly they can go from crying to laughing. Even in life, you can let certain things go, right off the bat, and switch into joy. Other things it may take some time to work through and be able to process, that you can do on a poem or on the page over time, that you can kind of come to basically a greater sense of understanding or emotional peace within yourself.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for sharing that. I think it's important always to make sure we have that element of play for sure, even if it's just like the simple joys that we're taking in and just having fun with it. And, like you mentioned before, keeping the child within you without being childish, of course, still embodying that balance. So, definitely something we should all take with us today. And, to everybody listening, if you're inspired by Scott's words, Scott's journey, again, couple weeks we're going to be having his release to the book, and you can also check out, you do have some other titles available right now too, don't you, Scott?
Sure. I got a collection of Shakespearean sonnets called Sconnets. That's Scott with 3 T's embedded in the word sonnets. A lot of those poems are acrostic sonnets, which, if you're familiar with an acrostic, kind of like each, the first letter forms a word going down. I look at sonnets as kind of like a magic square where, all right, what can I how much can I impact in this form? I know a lot of artists thrive on kind of constraints. So to be able to have, a bit of a literary constraint allows, the creativity to flourish. So yeah, you could check out, Sconnets. You could check out themayhempoets.com for some, we usually update where we're going to be. We got a full, April, a couple shows out there, artists in residence in Michigan, as well as some dates in Wisconsin and upstate New York. So like I said, stay at Poem Dad, but I'm going to be popping back and forth from doing some shows here and coming back to see the little one after every, 2 or 3 days. So yeah, check out those, always looking to, creatively collaborate and hear from other artists as well. You can feel free to share, my email or whichever, Scott3tsraven at email.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, well, we'll have that in the description box as well. And am I correct that the mayhempoets.com, that's our correct website for them to check you out on all the events? Is that correct?
Yes.
Wonderful. All right. And Instagram at Scott Raven as well, I believe. Well, these are all great resources for them to connect with you and reach out and find out more information and stay up to date with what's happening. So awesome. Thanks for sharing that with us. And to everybody listening right now, as we're waiting to wrap up today, you can head right to the description box of this podcast and poke it right there and check it out. With that, we wrap up our conversation with Scott Raven. His book, Stay at Home Dad, shows us how the everyday moments of parenting can become an extraordinary through the power of poetry. So whether you're a parent, a writer, a business person, or just someone looking to transform your own experiences into art, Scott's life really reminds us that success means adapting to life's changes while staying true to our creative spirit. And Authors on Mission is dedicated to empowering you with the knowledge and confidence to become an expert in your field. So, whether you're looking to write a book like Scott has, or perhaps, sharing your insights in your own industry, whatever it is, we offer a variety of services here at Authors on Mission, so you can check us out as well. And stay tuned for more insights from other authors who are changing the game one story at a time on our podcast. And again, remember, check out the Stay at Home Dad when it is released. And without further ado, thank you again, Scott, for joining us today on our podcast.
Thank you, Danielle. Swishing on the Authors on Mission.
I love it. All right. And thank you, everybody, for listening. Have a great day.
This is Danielle Hutchinson reminding you that somewhere, someone needs the book that only you can write. Visit authorsonmission.com to start your legacy. Until next time, keep leading, keep inspiring, and keep thinking in chapters. Have a great day.